Alright guys, welcome back to the advanced cloning tutorial here for the Lightroom Learning Group. And we have our image opened up here in Photoshop. So what I want to do is I want to create a copy of my background layer. Photoshop takes advantage of layers. So layers you can think of as just separate adjustments stacked on top of each other. And you can turn those layers on and off. So the layers are located on the right hand side. Right down here on my particular screen is where they're located in the bottom right corner. Now to copy the background layer, all I'm going to do is click and drag that down to this little square with a turned up corner, and that is going to create a copy. So when you have multiple layers, you can tell if they are viewable by this little eyeball to the left of that. On copy layer, I click on that little eyeball and it's going to turn that off. If I want to turn off both of them, I click on the eyeball and now you can see nothing there is visible. So this is a quick demonstration here. I'm going to put a brush mark on this background copy. You can tell that I'm working on the background copy because it is highlighted. So I'll go ahead and I will create a brush spot right there in the dead center of my image. And that is just to show you what happens when you turn off that background copy layer. So I'll go ahead and hit that eyeball. It turns off the layer and the brush spot goes away. So if you ever want to delete a layer, you can click and drag it right down to that little trash can there. I'll do that for that layer there. And I'll go ahead and make another copy. And I'll just click down, drag it to that little square with the turned up corner to create that background copy. So it is important to create that layer so that you are working on that layer and not working on the background image itself. It's just kind of an insurance policy, if you will. If you go ahead and you make a lot of adjustments on the layer and it turns out you don't like those adjustments, you can just quickly delete that layer. All right, so that's really why we want to be working on a layer. And it's helpful too in cloning. So I want to zoom in and start cloning this line away again here. So to zoom in, I'll hit the space bar on my keyboard and then I'll hit the command key on my keyboard to open up the zoom tool. That would be space and control if you're on a PC. So I'll zoom way in here. I want to get pretty close because we are getting into an area of this image where it's rather difficult to clone. We'll zoom in even a little bit farther there. Now to get to the stamp tool, you can head over here and just click right on it and that's going to open up your clone tool. All of your options in Photoshop are going to be here at the top. You want your mode to be normal. You can change the opacity really to whatever you want, and that's pretty obvious what the opacity is going to do. It's going to dictate how much of the effect is taking place. Generally 100% is where you want it, and I'll show you here in a little bit where you would want it at a lower opacity. Flow can be at 100%, that's fine. You want aligned to be checked, and you want to sample all layers. We won't go too far into detail about these options because, again, we are only going to be using Photoshop for a short amount of time. We may get into this in future tutorials, but right now it is not important. So I have the stamp tool highlighted over here. That's what is active. There is also a heal tool here in Lightroom. They are separate options. They're not held within the same tool like they are in Lightroom. And I'm sorry, I may have misspoke. This is how they are done in Photoshop. They are separate, whereas in Lightroom they are together in one tool. So I have the stamp tool active, and I have my brush about the size I want it to be. I can make it maybe just a little bit bigger there. I'll use the right bracket key. That works the same in Photoshop as it does in Lightroom. Now to select the area that I want to sample, what you want to do is hit the Alt key on your keyboard. So I'll go ahead and I'll hit the Alt key and it's going to come up with a crosshair. And I want to select, we'll just say this area right in there. So I'll just click and I'll let go. And so as I drag my cursor across, that sample spot is going to stick with my, my brush here. So I'll just go ahead and I'll click and I'll drag, and you can see that as I drag, that sampled area is coming right along with me. And I'll go back a little bit. And there's just a little spot right up here that stayed kind of white. We'll back up a little bit there. And we'll go down. All right, so now we're getting rid of that line there, and it's working pretty well. Now I've gotten to this area right here where the rapids kind of surround this area of the power line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my Option or my Alt key again, and I'll click kind of in the center here of the white area, and I'll drag right over here because I want that to stay white. And I'll just continue to click and drag, and we'll see what results we come up with. Now obviously this is very pixelated because we are zoomed way in, but we want it to have an organic look to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit here just to see what we're doing. So I'll go ahead and I'll hit the space bar, and I will hit the Alt key on my keyboard to zoom out. And then every time I tap, it just zooms out. So that's looking pretty good there. It looks like it's still fairly organic. It doesn't look too copied there. So I kind of like the progress that we're making. And I'll zoom back in by holding the space bar, and this time I'll hold down the Command key on my keyboard, the Control key if I'm on a PC. So we'll zoom in, and we will hit the Alt key again, and this time I'll click below this line here, right about there, and then I'll click and I'll just continue to drag over. And it takes quite a bit of time, but it's a lot easier. You get a lot better results the farther zoomed in you are. So you can see here that it's done a pretty good job, and maybe this line right here is not as organic as we'd like it to look. So I'll just one little click there. We'll kind of break that line up a little bit. And we will go ahead and turn off this layer, and you can see the progress that we have made there. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit my space bar again. Let me turn that back on. My space bar and then the Alt key to zoom out a little bit. And we'll see how this is starting to look. So I'll go ahead and turn that on again, or turn it off rather, to show us our original image without the layer that we've been cloning on. I'll turn it back on, and you can see here it's looking really pretty good. There's maybe a spot right in here that's looking kind of inorganic, and I'll zoom into that there, and we'll try and get rid of that. Because obviously, you know, in nature there's not too often perfectly straight lines. I'll hold down the Alt key again. So what we want to do is just, you know, and when you're doing something like this, where you're just trying to get rid of that appearance of a straight line, you don't have to get real specific with it, but you just kind of want to break up the consistency, if you will, of that straight line. We'll kind of go in there a little bit and just break up some of that. And then we will go ahead and just continue on our way here. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger because we're getting to an area where it looks like it should be fairly easy to clone this out. And again, you know, this is all stuff that you just can't do really easily in Lightroom. Even though Lightroom is definitely getting better as far as that heal tool goes, sometimes if you need to get really specific, it's just best to do it in Photoshop. Go ahead and I'll continue to click in here and sample some of this area here. And again, I want this to have a natural appearance, so I'll kind of round the edges of that a little bit. We'll get rid of some of this here. And I'll just continue to hold down the Alt key to resample as I'm doing this, and then click and drag some of this away. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger as we head into this area here. Continue to get rid of this. And I know this might be getting a little bit boring to watch, a little bit tedious, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep going at this here, just so that you guys can see a good before and after. And you can see I have a straight line there, so let's go ahead and try and get rid of that. Now here we have a fairly dark gray area there with a much brighter area below it. So here, and we have it a little bit over here too, I'm going to clone, but I'm going to turn the opacity down. So I'll select this area here, and what I'll do is I'll just kind of brush in that area there. And since it's at a 50% opacity, it's just going to kind of cause it to have this bit of gradation to it. So it's not going to be such an abrupt change in color. And so that will help give it a more normal appearance as well. And so I think that looks pretty good in there. I think it kind of gradates nicely from that white to the gray area there. And I'll bump my opacity back up to 100 as I move on. And if you just hold the space bar down to get your hand tool up there, you can just click and drag around in your image. I'll make that a little bit bigger. That's a little too big. Go about there, and I'll resample, and I'll just continue to clone away here. Maybe went a little too far away there. We'll go right below that and just kind of drag over. We'll go above that one and we'll drag over. And so the more you are zoomed in, the longer it's going to take, but ultimately the more natural it's going to end up looking. So again, I don't like this gradation here. This looks a little bit too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone it one more time with the opacity down. And that just kind of blends it a little nicer there. I'm kind of getting the same feeling in here. I feel like I can still see that bit of straight line there. So let's go over it with that lighter brush there with the 50% opacity. I'll just kind of break it up a little bit there. And let's see, maybe this area here. No, I'll hit the Command Z to undo that. I didn't really care for that. I think that's actually going to look pretty good. So we'll take our opacity back up. And we'll resample again by holding that Alt key and clicking and dragging. And you can see I still have that straight line there, so I'm going to resample and go over again. We'll go down here, we'll click and we'll drag, resample. It's good to resample kind of randomly, just again to have a natural look to the image. Here it looks like we have a bit of straight line going on. And again, when you're working with landscape photos, you kind of want to try and get rid of those straight lines as best you can, because of course straight lines just do not appear too often in nature. Kind of brush that in there. Come over here, we'll brush this in here. That's going to be looking pretty good there. Over there as well. Click and drag. It's getting a little bit easier now that we're getting away from the water. That water can be a pretty tricky thing to try and clone with. Now we see we have a couple straight lines there. Let's try and get rid of that. And again, if you're trying to break up a straight line, it can be good to just randomly go in and just kind of tap away there with the clone tool just to break up that straight line. You can kind of go up and down there. Get rid of that straight line there. Click and drag. Keep resampling here. So you can see it's very tedious sometimes, but a lot of times a good photo isn't going to be done in 2 clicks of a button. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of extra effort, a little bit more time, but in the end it's going to be worth it. Get rid of that there. Now we are back to the wilderness on the other side. We are definitely making some progress here. Just keep resampling and clicking and dragging to get these power lines to go away. And again, if you hold that space bar down, that'll give you that hand tool, which allows you to pan around your image. Another straight line. And of course, just like anything else with Lightroom, the more you do this, the easier it's going to be. It's just going to become second nature. You're going to know when you want to resample, when you kind of want to break things up a little bit. It'll just come second nature to you eventually. Found some trees here. We'll get rid of the power line and the trees there. Whoops. So sometimes you accidentally clone what you're trying to get away from. And we'll just hit the Command Z to undo that and go at it again here. Resample, and click and drag. It's starting to look pretty good here. And the tree line here and the leaves, you don't have to get real accurate because of course there is a lot of randomness in nature, so you don't really have to worry about getting too specific. And would you look at that, it looks like our power line is gone. There's a straight line here. I'm not sure what that is, if that's maybe part of the power line, but we'll get rid of it. There might be a little bit of straight line there as well. Just kind of cover that up. I'll just keep hovering over here and see it. Okay, so it reappears again, and we'll just continue to click to sample and get rid of the power line. And then just to reiterate, it is important to remember that you're zoomed way in, so a lot of this isn't really going to be seen in your final image. So these lines here, they're very faint. They probably won't even be seen once you zoom out. But it's never a bad idea just to get rid of them. Hit Command Z to undo that. If you can see them while you're zoomed in here, why not get rid of them? And there we go. We are at the end of the power line. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to double click on the hand tool. That's going to zoom me out. And now you can see that power line is completely gone. We have a pretty natural looking line right down here. I believe it was going right through there. I can hardly even tell. But if you want to go ahead and see what it looked like before, you can turn the layer off by hitting that eyeball there. And you can see there is our power line. And we'll go ahead and turn that layer back on, which is of course going to contain all of our cloning. And that looks pretty darn good. You could, I suppose, if you wanted to, go back in here and maybe adjust this area a little bit. We'll maybe tweak that just a touch. It looked maybe a little inorganic. bounce around a little bit there to kind of give it a better edge. And I'll double click on that hand tool again to zoom back out, turn it off, and turn it on again. All right, so now we are done with the cloning. That looks really good in my opinion. I think it looks totally natural. So what we'll do is we'll go up to File, and we'll go to Save. And down here in the lower left, it's going to show you the progress of the saving there. And saving can take a little while because, again, you're working on a pretty large file here, and you've essentially doubled the size by creating that copy layer right there. So it can take a little bit of time to save it, and now you can see it's done saving. We'll go back to Lightroom, and it's going to save the image right next to the previous image. So we'll go ahead and hit the G key, and so now you can see here I have two of those images. There's the original with the power lines in it, of course, right there, and then the image that we did in Photoshop after removing those power lines. So once you save it, it's going to save it right next to the original image in Photoshop. You don't have to worry about its location or anything like that. Lightroom and Photoshop do all the work for you. All right, guys, there you go. There is the advanced cloning in Lightroom and Photoshop for you. If you have any questions at all, as always, feel free to contact me or leave your comments below. Or, of course, you can always pose a question to the group. All right, we'll talk to you later.